Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly.
Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, your podcast to cruise a little smarter. I'm your host, Lake, and I'm joined by my co-host, Christy. Christy, how are you tonight?
I am well, Lake. How are you?
Doing pretty good. We have a quick little 101 bonus episode for you, something that we need to hit on: cruising during hurricane season.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yes, there can definitely be some frustrations, some good and some bad with that, and some unexpected changes can certainly be found, which we will get into.
You are well-versed in unexpected changes because you just had an unexpected change from your cruise.
I did, and I will get into that towards the end, only because oddly enough, mine was not necessarily hurricane related, but storm related. But we will swing back around to how that was affected and how Disney communicated, because I think that's the important part of that story.
Oh, now I'm even more curious about, I know how they communicated, but I can't wait for you to share, from your perspective about it.
It was wild. Well, first off, if you are new to cruising or cruising in the Caribbean and Bahamas, hurricane season takes place from July until late fall, like end of November. I will say typically late fall is going to be your more active range for this area, as we are currently seeing. But that does not mean that you should just avoid cruising during those times. I mean, half of that is peak cruise season.
Right. And it's the shoulder season for cruising, so you can find the most attractive rates for cruising during that season. And it's also, for Disney specifically, Halloween on the high seas, and we have the beginning of maritime cruises. So this is a popular cruise season for Disney. It just happens to coincide with hurricane season.
Yep. But that obviously does not mean that cruising ends.
Nope.
It just means that you may need to plan for a little extra flexibility in your cruise plan.
Let's start with the basics. Cruise lines are going to take the safety of the ship, the crew, and the passengers. They're going to take the safety of those three, we'll call them assets of theirs, very seriously. And they're going to want to make sure that their crew, their ships, and their passengers are safe, and that nothing is going to happen to them. So the cruise line is not going to take your ship into a hurricane. The overall fear of going on a cruise during hurricane season, I feel like that fear can be pushed aside a little, just because their safety is their number one concern during this time of year.
Exactly. And luckily, one of the perks of being on a cruise ship is it allows a lot of flexibility on where you can go. When you book your cruise, there is a lot of fine lines that basically say, we do not have to take you where this says this is going. And hurricanes and storms is probably the number one reason why this does not happen. I mean, heck, sometimes you don't get into Castaway because it's windy.
More times than honestly is talked about. And it definitely says that. I know it can be disappointing, but your cruise contract and your terms and conditions, the little box that you check that says you agree to the terms and conditions, says that they can change the port. Really, they're giving you a vessel to move from place to place.
Yes, we did see just a few months ago the Treasure doing the 7-night sailings. Those sailings, very typically, if a storm is going to affect the sailing, they change it from a Western to an Eastern or an Eastern to a Western. That's a very common flex that Disney Cruise Line does. Christy, we've also seen a recent adjustment with the storm that is currently active, correct?
Yes. So we're recording on the 25th. This will air who knows when, but on the 26th sailing of the Wish, so that's the Friday sailing, that's the weekend cruise sailing, they are now dropping Nassau and going to Castaway Cay on their Nassau day. And then they're going to have a sea day for their last day before returning to port. Disney doesn't expect that it's going to change the length of the cruise or anything else affecting it. In the past, some of the things Disney has done, as Lake mentioned, they'll change the course of the cruise, go to the Eastern versus the Western, or skip a port, or it has very rarely happened where your cruise is actually shortened or extended. More times than not, it would be extended, where they have to keep the ship out to sea while either the port is closed or something like that. But that is also something that can occur, that the cruise length can change.
And if one cruise is extended, another one is shortened. My very first cruise, which was not with Disney, was extended by a day because we hit a winter storm, funny enough, because it actually sailed out of Baltimore.
And 2 years in a row, there have been Wish sailings in the fall that the previous 4-day cruise was coming back into port, and the 3-night cruise that left on Friday, the ship came in late, so it was late to disembark the passengers, and it was late to bring on the passengers, so much so that they actually boarded around 8 o'clock, and people that had first dining did not have their first night rotational dining because the ship boarded so late. So that is something that can happen. It is rare. It has been on one sailing for the past 2 years. So 2 times that I am aware of, but it is definitely something that can happen.
And as well, going off of that factor of getting in or going out late, occasionally home ports can close.
Right, which has happened. So there have been other cases. The one cruise that actually was extended by 2 days, the port was closed, which is why it was extended by a couple of days. Now, cruise lines could always go to a nearby port, but I haven't really seen that happen because typically those ports are pretty full with their ships coming in and out. But that is definitely something that could happen if it was required. There was, I guess, that bridge that got hit in Baltimore where the Carnival ship that was cruising out of there couldn't return there, and future cruises had to be moved because the port was inaccessible.
So why don't we go into a little bit of detail of how Disney communicates these changes? As I said, I've just dealt with that. There is a section on Disney Cruise Line's website. So you can find that by going to the Disney Cruise Line website, scrolling down and going to the guest services tab. And from there, that's going to bring you up basically a whole bunch of different problem solving. And one of them is weather updates. And now Disney is supposed to update that with any changes to current sailings. I do see it does not currently reflect the Wish change that they've already announced.
And here's the reason why. This says tropical weather update, and there's no advisories. And there are technically no advisories from the Weather Service. And so we'll talk about this nuance in a moment as it relates to your trip insurance. But because there's no weather alert, Disney hasn't updated that section. But the change to the cruise was actually sent via email to its passengers. And then it's also available like on my travel agent site, for example. I found it in news that this was a news, but I don't believe that this was listed on the consumer site just generally for people to see. But that is where you would see a weather advisory. That's where you would see if, because of weather, a cruise ship had an altered length of cruise or was canceled or delayed or things of that nature. Lake, how did you find out about the weather affecting your cruise?
Actually, Steve and I and our significant others were booked on the British Isles cruise out of Southampton. And I didn't even know that a big storm was supposed to hit basically all of UK for that entire week. So we were actually in London. Our cruise left on a Monday. We were sitting down to see a show on Saturday. And about 5 minutes before the show started, we got an email that said, basically, due to unexpected poor weather conditions, this is our new itinerary. And it basically crossed out every UK port and just relisted, hey, we're taking you to Norway.
I mean, that's a significant change.
Yes, it was pretty crazy. We will not go into total detail of that, but that is an example of what can happen. What was interesting is we actually knew that before the crew, or some of the crew.
Oh my gosh.
Which doesn't mean some of the crew knew, but it was not communicated across the entire ship effectively.
Like if it was 2 days before, they should be letting everybody know 2 days before. But it's also possible that they had the fact that they had to change it, but didn't have everything finalized. Like that they needed to move the ship out of England or the British Isles because the weather was going to be too poor. And here's the thing. If it's really bad sea conditions, you don't want to be on that ship. even if there's no like concern about it damaging the ship. But if the ship is going to be crazy, if the weather is going to be crazy and they can avoid that crazy, then you want them to do that, even if it totally changes the cruise. But I really wonder if they still needed to finalize which ports they were eventually going to be able to go to. And that's why they didn't share it. But I sort of feel like they should have shared in advance that people weren't going on a British Isles cruise when they knew before everybody showed up in London.
I will say it was totally the right call for our sailing because our last night getting back into Southampton was crazy. It was storming and lightning, and the ship was doing all sorts of rocking and rolling. So a week of our smooth sailing in Norway with great weather was definitely much better than what we would have been dealing with in the British Isles.
Yeah, such a change.
But I will say, going off of that too, Disney did not offer anyone any sort of compensation. The only thing they did say was you can cancel with a full refund. So they really honored that, hey, we can take you wherever, whenever, and you're going to have to enjoy it.
Yeah, and you should like it. Let's go from there to trip insurance, because it just occurred to me something that I thought of when you were talking about this sailing and how Disney didn't offer anything. I know in your particular case, you had a tour that there was a deposit that got lost. And if you had trip insurance, you would be able to give that lost deposit to the trip insurance in this case, because the cruise line moved you, and they would cover that. I would check your credit card that you put the deposit on to see if your credit card has any trip insurance, because actually a lot of credit cards do. Disney Visa, though, does not. If it's a Disney Visa premium card, whatever they call the one that has like the $50 fee, or the regular Disney Visa, neither of those have trip insurance. Disney Visa also charges a foreign transaction fee. So it really is just a terrible card to use when you're going overseas for trips like a British Isles cruise. So just something to keep in mind. But in terms of every other aspect of trip insurance, if there's a fear of a storm and no official advisories like we are currently in right now, your trip insurance will not allow you to cancel your cruise for a refund unless you have cancel for any reason insurance. If you buy Disney Cruise Line insurance, Disney Cruise Line offers a 75% cancel for any reason insurance included, where you would get 75% of your cruise fare back in a future cruise credit that has to be spent on Disney Cruise Line to be used within the next year. So that is an option if you are afraid of the storm, or if you don't want to have any risks or any changes, you could utilize your cancel for any reason insurance. Otherwise, insurance would cover if your home state was affected by a hurricane where you couldn't travel, or if the location you were going to is affected by a hurricane and you couldn't travel, if flights were canceled. And again, we're not giving insurance advice. We are not insurance agents. There's our little disclaimer, but those are general rules as it relates to insurance. Definitely review your contract, because I believe there are a lot of people out there that'll be like, oh, well, you haven't trip insurance, just use that. Well, you can't just cancel for any reason. It has to be a covered reason. And fear of a storm is not a covered reason. So just things to keep in mind. Until the National Hurricane Center names the region and names the warning areas for the storm, most hurricane clauses in an insurance policy will not cover your cruise or your travel.
Well, taking it back from there, though, of course, there are some reservations with traveling during hurricane. But again, flexibility is probably the biggest thing. Again, we always preach about getting in a day early, maybe even flying out a day late, giving yourself a little bit extra time on either end, especially during those late fall seasons, could really be the difference maker there.
If you're cruising out of Florida, for example, this is a Disney Cruise Line podcast. Most of our cruises are out of Florida. Who should you look to see what is going on with the weather for your Florida cruises? I would recommend, and Lake would recommend, Dennis Phillips out of Tampa. He does often mention the cruises when he's updating the weather situation and whether people should be concerned. So he covers more than just Tampa, but his weather isn't local necessarily to Orlando. And so his weather might be different. There's Eric Burris from Orlando, and he is another one that is good to cover or good to watch because he is specific to Orlando. And then obviously the National Weather Center. There's in Melbourne too, there is a National Weather Center hub. And that is the city that in the area that's closest to the cruise port. So they always discuss it. And then Port Canaveral and Fort Lauderdale, which is Port Everglades, they both have social media pages as well, where they discuss whether the port is closed or open or things like that. And that's important because that's going to help you know if the cruise line hasn't quite announced it yet, whether your ship is coming in or not to port at the time that you think that it should be. So they would be a good one to follow as well. And I think that's it. The only other tip I would say, if you are cruising during hurricane season, first of all, these storms could pop up without a ton of notice. A lot of times we do have notice of a week or so. I would say in general, if you are taking a cruise in this day and age, bring 1 to 2 extra days of your medication if you take prescription or other medication that you're required to take daily, because there could be a situation. There's canceled flights nowadays. There's other delays and cancellations. So I always, when I travel at this point, bring 2 extra days of medication with me for the things that I shouldn't stop taking. So I would definitely recommend doing that because of flights and because of cruise changes and things of that nature. And I guess that's the only major tip. The other thing is just be flexible if you are cruising during hurricane season and cruising in general, because the storm is obviously out of anybody's control, and the cruise line is still going to try to make sure that you have an amazing time. We've all seen this where we didn't get to park at Castaway, right? The ship couldn't dock. And so the cruise line will do everything they can to give you another amazing day on the ship. They're going to revamp the schedule. They're going to do everything possible to make it a fun day for you. So even if they're switching your itinerary from Eastern to Western, or your cruise day is extended, or you have to miss a port, the cruise lines are going to do everything they can to make sure that you're still having an amazing experience. So just be flexible and look for the fun in those new amazing experiences that you have access to.
Yeah, cruising during hurricane season is safe. It can come with some unique sets of challenges, but obviously safety comes first. And sometimes those unexpected detours definitely make for some of the most memorable stories.
Like 5 minutes before your West End theater play or musical is going to start, where you're like, oh, we have to revamp a cruise.
The worst part was we got out of the show and we're like, okay, we're in London. What are we supposed to do? I was like, I think we need to sit down and figure out what the heck we're doing on this cruise now.
Right. You had new travel planning when you did so much travel planning before the cruise.
So much pivoting on that cruise. I can't wait to record an episode on that, actually.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear all about it. Your pictures were amazing. And we will actually have a highlight for your Norway experience. So if you haven't seen it yet, go to the podcast Instagram page and you'll be able to see the highlights. They did so many fun things, and Lake did a great job of reporting all week long.
Yeah, but I think that about covers everything you need to know for cruising during hurricane season. Future Lake here. Just one more quick note about sailing during hurricane season. If you're looking to utilize travel insurance, make sure that you have that before it is a named storm. Once a named storm is on the Weather Service advisory, then you can no longer utilize travel insurance because it is not going to cover the current active storm. You need to have that purchased before a storm is named. Christy, where can our listeners follow you?
You can find me all over the internet at packyourpixiedust.com. And if you are interested in working with me on a future cruise, Lake has made I point every time as if I'm looking at the show notes, but Lake has made a link in the show notes for you to be able to work with me and send me a message directly from there. Lake, where can we find you?
You can find me on YouTube and Instagram at MouseGen, and you can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at DCL Podcast. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you next time on the DCL Podcast. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Well, that's going to wrap up our Sailing During Hurricane Season show. If you're enjoying the show, we greatly appreciate you leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We'd also like to thank our Patreons who help make this show happen each and every week for us. You too can help support the show by visiting us at patreon.com/DCL Podcast. Whether you're boarding a cruise, enjoying a trip to the parks, or adventuring outside of Disney, on behalf of myself, Christy, and Steve, we want to wish you smooth sailing and safe travels. And we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.
The DCL Podcast is not affiliated with the Disney Cruise Line, Walt Disney Company, Adventures by Disney, or Run Disney. All of the opinions expressed on our shows are those of the hosts and the guests who appear on the show. If you have any questions about any of these products, please contact the Walt Disney Company.